Hola, I'm Dr. Aisha Dennis, and I'm your Spanish language coach. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This channel is about learning how to teach your child Spanish, even if you don't speak Spanish yourself. So, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a mother of three bilingual children. I'm a school administrator and also a certified Spanish teacher. Now, you may be wondering, how did I learn Spanish and how was I able to teach my children Spanish? So, like many people, I learned Spanish in high school and I continued that process to college and also lived abroad for some time. So, I did have the advantage of being fully immersed in the language and being able to use the language to practice. However, when I was in high school and I was learning Spanish, I was very deliberate about learning Spanish. I lived in a community where I had access to Spanish speakers, and I wanted to be able to communicate as often as possible. So I also would watch TV in Spanish, even though I had no clue what was being said. I would listen to the radio in Spanish. I would learn songs in Spanish, and I would sing them and still not have any idea what was being said. But I was determined to learn the language. When I decided to study Spanish as my major in college, I again was not able to speak Spanish yet. I knew Spanish from taking it in high school, but like many of us, we learned Spanish in high school without actually learning to speak the language, unfortunately. And then it wasn't until I was able to go abroad where I was forced to use the language that I actually saw all the years that I had accumulated the knowledge of learning Spanish and actually had an opportunity to use it. So fast forward, I decide to have children, and my goal is to make sure that my children are bilingual because I don't want them to struggle with the same issues that I had when trying to learn Spanish. So my first child, my son, I decided I was going to speak to him half of the time in Spanish, half of the time in English. That was very successful. And I was able to make sure that he understood, but he was reluctant in speaking back to me in Spanish. So that was like my first lesson. Then I have my second child, my daughter, and I said, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to speak to her half of the time in English, half of the time in Spanish, but I'm going to make sure that she actually speaks back to me in Spanish, which she did, but not consistently. So again, understands 100%, can speak Spanish, but not consistent with speaking Spanish to me. And then I have my third and final child, and I decided, no, I'm going to change this method and I'm only going to speak to her in Spanish. So for the past 16 and a half years, I've only spoken to my daughter in Spanish. I've never spoken to her in English, and she has never spoken to me in English. So we communicate 100% in Spanish. Now, people are surprised that I was able to be that consistent, but after two failed attempts, I realized that it took consistency for me to get this process. Now, I'm not suggesting that you only speak to your child in Spanish, but I am going to give you some tips and strategies that I use to be able to help you speed up the process so that it doesn't take you 20 plus years to be able to converse with your children or others in Spanish for that matter. So you want to know, how can I, meaning you, how can you start teaching your child Spanish if you don't speak the language? Well, there are many things that you can do. So let me give you some strategies. The first thing is start with what you know. When I say start with what you know, most people know how to count to at least 10 in Spanish. Most people know some words in Spanish like hola or cómo estás or me llamo, or another expression that people use often is no comprendo, which is not really that commonly used. It's really an expression that's very Americanized, but most Spanish speakers use no entiendo. But you at least can use the language that you know. So that will get you started. So what can you do with using numbers with your children? Well, start off with counting small things. If they're between the toddler stage and they have toys, count the toys with them as you play. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, etc. What else can you count? You can tell them you have 3 minutes to come and sit down. Uno, dos, tres. You can give them 3 pieces of their favorite snack. So you can tell them, you can count out the pieces of the snack. Uno, dos, tres. So these are just some of the ways that you can introduce something very basic as numbers. Okay, what else do you already know in Spanish? You probably know some words in Spanish and didn't realize that they were Spanish words. Let me give you some examples. Fiesta, patio, hospital, cereal. And these are all words that are in English and in Spanish. Pizza, taco, and enchiladas. These are Spanish words. You know these words already. So instead of just skimming through them, take the time to actually make sure that you are using them in sentences as often as possible. Next would be to start listening to nursery songs with your child, which would include being sure that you learn the tunes. You're not going to know every single word, which is fine, but just go ahead and use the language as often as possible and sing with them. The more often that you play it, the more your ears will get attuned and you'll start to understand at least how to pronounce the words, even if you don't know what the words mean. My next suggestion, my next tip or strategy is to find bilingual books. Now, you may be saying, but I don't know how to read in Spanish. That's fine. You don't have to know how to read in Spanish. You can use YouTube. So what I often do for students who take classes with me in Spanish is I play for them. I go on YouTube and I search a book in Spanish that is bilingual. So they will hear the reader, who often is a native speaker, but it doesn't have to be a native speaker. They'll hear the reader speak in Spanish as they read aloud the book. This is one way for you to introduce bedtime stories to your children in Spanish, or if you simply want to have them just listen to the story that you're reading. And then when you want to read with them that same book, you'll understand what's being said because it's bilingual. The final tip that I'll give you is watch a movie or a TV show with your child in Spanish. So what are some programs that you can watch? I recommend programs that are child appropriate. So one of my favorite, or one of my children's favorite, and my favorite as well, programs that we would watch on YouTube is called Pocoyó. Pocoyó is this precocious little child who they have it in English and they also have it in Spanish. So if you look up Pocoyó in Español, you'll be able to watch episodes of this wonderful program that is offered on YouTube. I also would watch Plaza Sésamo, which is Sesame Street in Spanish. The wonderful thing about Plaza Sésamo, just like Sesame Street, is it introduces colors and numbers and letters and sounds and themes. So even if you don't understand everything, it's okay. Just put the program on for them and let them watch it. A movie that I would recommend that's child appropriate, at least for what I believe, which is generally around toddler appropriate age and up, are movies like Coco. Coco is a movie that is focused on El Día de los Muertos. So this is something that you can watch with your child as well. And there are tons of other movies. I would just Google bilingual movies or movies in Spanish for children. Okay, so now the question is, why? Why should you learn Spanish? And why should your child learn Spanish? Well, honestly, the demographics of the United States are shifting. Did you know that by 2025, approximately 1 out of 5 people in the US will be speaking Spanish? Now, if you think about that, that's just a few years from now. Will your child be one of them, or will they be like the majority of people who go to school, learn Spanish in high school, and forget it and never use it again? So remember, their world, which is going to be 5, 10, 15 years, depending on the age of your child into the future, is not going to be the current world that we're living in. So with that shift in demographics, do you want your child to be the child who is not able to communicate with more and more people who are in the United States? The other important point to know, or demographic to know, is that Spanish is the second most spoken language in the United States behind English. So if you call any major company, they're going to have an option for you to press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish. There's a reason for that. Most places don't ask you to press 3 for French and 4 for German and 5 for Russian. It's because it's reflective of the demographics of the United States. Now, there are some also educational benefits, one being cognitive benefits. And this is something that as a school administrator that I see a lot. I have seen a lot of children with a deficiency in cognitive skills. They did not have strong foundational skills in school. And so as they've gone up into middle school and high school, that's emphasized by their lack of ability to be thinkers in which they can think critically. So what makes cognitive benefits a plus with Spanish? Well, because your child's brain, as it's being developed, they're learning not only how, but they're also learning when to switch between languages, when they need to use Spanish, when they need to use English. And this is important. This helps them develop their brain muscle over time. It helps with their creativity. Well, an increase in creativity is something that our children definitely need. The more we give our children technology, the less their creativity is being developed because they don't have to think on their own. People are thinking for them. So this is an opportunity to develop their creativity, because what happens when you don't know a word? Well, most people use a synonym or a word that has a similar meaning. The same will happen in Spanish. If your child doesn't know how to express themselves in Spanish by using a particular word, they'll find a creative way to express themselves to get the idea across. Now you're wondering, when should you start? Today. You should start right away. It doesn't matter if you didn't start, 5 years ago when your child was younger. I don't care what the age of your child is, if they're in school, if they're not in school, but today is when you need to start. Starting most things early is what indicates a huge factor for success. Like what? Well, investing early helps you to earn income compounded income over the years. The same thing with Spanish. Learning to read early. People always talk about the benefits, and scientists talk about the benefits of learning to read early, because it's an indicator of success later in your child's academic years. Well, learning Spanish early is one of those indicators as well. So when's the best time for a child, or the easiest time for a child to learn a language? Well, we want to take advantage of what's known as the critical period. The critical period is that time when your child's brain is still being developed and they can easily acquire a new language. That usually happens between birth and age 5. So these are just some of the tips and strategies that I'll be sharing on the channel to help you teach your child Spanish. So the next thing that I want you to do is I want you to tell me, what do you want me to teach you to help you to teach your child Spanish? I will be following up with videos about phrases that you can use with your children to get started talking immediately, and I'll respond to the messages that are in the comments. Help me to help you to teach your child Spanish and help your child to become a purple unicorn. What's a purple unicorn? A purple unicorn is someone who's rare, who has a unique skill that's not commonly found. So be sure to follow this channel so you can learn more tips and strategies on how to teach your child Spanish, even if you don't speak Spanish yourself. Hasta la próxima vez. Until next time, adios.